And we are live. Welcome, everyone, to the show. Today, I got an amazing guest. Everyone knows who he is. I don't need to introduce him, but I will anyway. George Gammon, the best-looking guy in macro economics. You're like a silver fox almost looking. You got the hair looking all sharp. How are you, George?
Yeah, well, those are some kind words, Ben. I don't know if I can live up to those expectations that you set, but it's great to be on. It's been a long time since we've had a chance to chat, so I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's with everything going on. I was having a conversation with I think it was actually like Big Swear, who and we're sitting there talking, and we brought up your name, and I was like, God, I got to get a hold of George. You know, George will know what to do.
Well, yeah, I don't know about that, but if I know what to do, I don't know if I go that far, but I've at least maybe given it some thought.
Yeah, it's and you've been on fire lately, man. Great friggin' content, great, guest, and just you're killing it, man. You're killing it. I love it. I love your show.
Well, thank you very much. You know, as you know well, the only thing we can do is just sit here and be ourselves and talk about the things that we care about. And if other people resonate with that, well, that's fantastic. Allows us to keep doing what we're doing.
Absolutely. Now, the first question I got for you is actually, so hang on, let me make sure I mute this. There we go. Is as we sit right now, what's your biggest worry?
Well, I mean, as far as I'm assuming you're talking about the freedom and liberty and free market capitalism type of space.
Well, here, let me break it up over a couple of questions.
Yeah. I mean, my biggest concern right now is my left shoulder because I dislocated it a couple months ago, but I don't think that's the answer you're looking for.
Well, at least, are you left-handed?
No, fortunately I'm right-handed, but yeah, just the physical therapy every day is really brutal. But I think more along the lines of your question, Ben, what I've been really contemplating most, especially the last few days, is the BIS's new report that they just came out with outlining their plan for a central bank digital currency. This came out just last week, and they're calling it a unified ledger that is a tokenized programmable platform. And I've been pounding the table about really a CBDC being nothing more than a centralized ledger system, because that's all money really is. And what I didn't realize after reading the 34-page report probably 15 or 20 times is, well, what I didn't realize before reading it, excuse me, is that they're not just talking about tokenizing US dollars or tokenizing currency or bank deposits. They're talking about doing it with assets and with private property where there's a need to transfer ownership. So what most people would be familiar with would be homes, cars, things with title, where if you pay for it in cash, Bitcoin, digital dollars or whatever it is, that the legal ownership would transfer from the seller to the buyer. And so what they're wanting to do, and now again, whether they can do it or not is another question, but what they want to do globally, not just in the United States, but this would be a global unified ledger, is to tokenize all of the deposits, the bank deposits, and tokenize all private property where you can transfer ownership. And this would include stocks and whatnot. And then what would be required to buy one of these assets would be something that was tokenized, such as a dollar or or whatever currency that they used locally, right? And then who manages this would be the local central bank, and what most people don't really think about is the central bank has an infinite balance sheet. So one of the main reasons that's important is because they don't have to lend based on merit, right? We know that banks create 95% of the quote unquote dollars, right? Just by lending them into existence. But a bank, to a certain degree, has to be cognizant of profit and loss. Therefore, if they're giving a loan, they've got to be pretty sure that they're going to get paid back. The central bank doesn't have that constraint. They can lend to anybody for whatever reason. And so what that does is that builds a world, an environment, an economy where the majority of lending is done not based on merit, but based on narrative. So as an example, if you're part of a specific disadvantaged group, whatever is in political favor at the time, then you would be far more likely to get a loan at a lower interest rate, even if you had a 500 credit score. Because, of course, we shouldn't be lending to people based on a credit score because that's racist or homophobic or transphobic or, plug in the most recent buzzword. So what I've been doing is giving a lot of thought to not just how this system works, but more so how to live outside of the system. Because I realize that people, yes, I can show them the problem. I can explain it to them. I can explain the back end mechanics and the plumbing. But then the question becomes, well, what do I do about it? And that, unfortunately, is a very, very difficult question to answer. Because after reading this report, it became obvious to me that the majority of people out there, the average Joe and Jane, the normies, if you will, they will see this system as far superior to not just the current system, but any other competing system. And that would include Bitcoin, that would include silver, gold, etc. And so why do I say that? Because with a unified ledger, there are no borders. So what happens is first, as you know well with FedNow, they can you can transact 24/7 and the payments settle instantly. So if I'm here in the United States, I'm not here, but if I was in the United States, if I want to send $5,000 to someone, you can either do that with Zelle, but now they have FedNow, and you can just do that instantly, and it settles instantly. So this is kind of back-end plumbing for a CBDC. But what a unified ledger would do globally is it would allow you to send currency units from your bank account to any bank account in the world instantly, 24/7, 365 days a year. It would be free of charge, and you would be able to swap one currency for another currency. So a specific example, I'm here in Medellin, Colombia, as you know, and I've purchased, in the past, I've purchased several properties here. And to do so, it's a pain in the ass, for lack of a better term, because I have to take the dollars from the United States. I have to, change them into pesos. You have to bring them down to an account here, and then you have to take it from your brokerage account into a bank account. And from the bank account, you got to get it into the seller's account. And it's a process. And as you guys know well, I'm sure on this channel, that's one of the amazing things about Bitcoin is, if I was paying that seller in Bitcoin, well, I could just transfer it to him instantly. And you don't have all of this friction, and you don't have a majority of the cost, and you have pretty much zero headache, zero stress. But what they're doing with this unified ledger is allowing you to do that with any currency units. So one of the disadvantages that Bitcoin has for the normies is it's volatile. So if they want to buy something in a month, do they want to hold Bitcoin from now until then? Who knows what the price is going to be? So for most of the normies, they like to hold a certain percentage of their overall net worth in the local currency because their expenses are denominated in that local currency, and they don't have that volatility. So for the average Joe, this is going to roll out first and foremost that they can do these transactions domestically 24/7, pretty much free of charge. And then the central planners will say, okay, now you can do that. If you want to go to Mexico, if you want to go to Colombia, if you want to go anywhere in the world and buy something, you can do that. And it's instant and it's free. And it's, cheaper than the Lightning Network, but you can do it in a local currency. And so then you don't have that FX risk, right? So
Yeah.
Again, I understand that people that are concerned, rightfully so, about the Orwellian component, the big brother component, and everything else that goes along with ACBDC, that they say, no way, I'm not doing it. I understand the downside. That's totally understandable and totally rational. But what you also have to realize is that 99% of the public out there is not like you and I, Ben. They're just not, unfortunately. We do our best to try to help educate people and to open their eyes. But let's be honest. Let's go back to 2020. 50% of the people, not only 50% of Americans, were not only okay with the lockdowns, they demanded them. And let that sink in for a moment, right? We've got 50% of Americans right now don't even know what the difference between a man and a woman.
God, I hope it's not that high.
They don't know up from down. They don't know. They just don't have any. We are debating right now in the United States whether we should basically be teaching porn to elementary kids. You've got Target that's wanting to put tuck-in bathing suits, as an example, front and center, so for all the kids to see. Those are the types of normies that we're dealing with. You think those people aren't going to want a CBDC? And another thing that I think that, after really giving this a lot of thought, that I don't think a lot of people that are on our side are cognizant of, is they're not going to announce a CBDC. Right. Why would they do that? There's no reason for it whatsoever. And one of the thought experiments that I always encourage people to go through is, and I would encourage every one of your listeners to do this right now. How do you know that you're not using a CBDC right now?
Yeah.
How do you know that? You know that your dollars are a liability of Wells Fargo and not of the Federal Reserve? And you know that this isn't on a domestic unified ledger? How would you know that? You think they're going to tell you? Absolutely not. So one of our big challenges, Ben, that we have is how do we push back against something that we don't even know exists? And then even if you do know that it exists, who do you push back against, right? Because let's say that this BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, they implement this along with the IMF, along with the World Economic Forum and the EU or something like that. Okay, great. Let's just say they do announce it, which I highly doubt they would. But let's say they do. Well, who do you push back against? Who do you Klaus?
Right.
What are you going to go to Switzerland? How is that going to work? So if you and I am a huge proponent of just standing up and saying no. I think that's how we win. I think that was evident if you look at what happened in Romania as an example. I always talk about that 1989, how they took out Ceausescu. I think you look at the truckers more recently up in Canada and how powerful that movement was. And it doesn't take the majority of people. It just takes a small vocal minority to stand up and just say no to really move the needle. But who do we stand up and just say no to? Right? It's weird because it's like we're moving into a world, if this comes to fruition, where the tyranny to a certain degree is decentralized to where you can't really pinpoint it, right? So unfortunately, the conclusion that I came to is the probability of us actually stopping a CBDC is very low. Very, very. It's not that we shouldn't try, but we have to understand that the probability of us stopping it is incredibly low. And because it's not going to be thrust upon people. They're not going to use coercion. And this is, I think, another mistake that people in our space make. They're not going to force people to use this. People are going to want to use it. And they're not even going to know they're using it. Because what they're going to do is they're going to say, hey, it's the exact same system, but now we've got these brand new features, Ben. You're going to love them. Well, first, now what you can do, instead of having to wait for business hours and all that nonsense to send a wire, now you can instantly send money to anyone in the United States 24/7, 365 days a year. And the average Joe is going to say, oh, wow, that sounds amazing. Where do I sign up for that? And they say, oh, but wait, there's more. It gets even better. Because now you can not only do that, but you can do that anywhere in the world. And you can transfer dollars into euros, into pesos, into yen, into whatever you want. And you can make payments to people in Mexico where you take your dollars and instantly turn them into pesos and deposit them in the account of the business where you're trying to buy XYZ good or service. And it happens instantly and it happens free of charge. And every single person in the United States is going to say, oh, wow. That, not everyone, but you know what I'm saying? That 99% of the people are going to say, wow, that's amazing. Oh, this is great. This is fantastic. And I can just do that on my cell phone. But what they're not realizing is that they are participating in a unified ledger, which effectively is a CBDC. And so, in my opinion, they're going to slowly roll out these features, and people who are violently opposed to a CBDC aren't even going to know that they're using a CBDC. They're just going to see they're going to see the features and say, oh, well, wow, I was listening to Ben and George, and man, they talk all this smack about the banking system and Jamie Dimon. I don't know. I mean, they're not so bad. Look at all these features that they're rolling out, trying to make my life easier and make banking a lot cheaper. And now I can go to Mexico and I don't even have to change dollars for pesos. Man, Wells Fargo, good job. I'm Ben, and I don't know what Ben and George are smoking. They're crazy. But ironically, Ben, it's going to be those types of people, even the people that are totally opposed to a CBDC. They're going to be using these features, and they're going to be say, okay, fine. If you come out with 24/7 banking, that's great. But whatever you do, don't roll out that CBDC. And they don't even understand that the wool is going to be pulled right over their eyes. And then what's going to happen once you get people integrated into this system to where they become dependent on it and used to it, then they start rolling out the social credit score. Then they start rolling out the climate credit score or whatnot. And again, I'm going to do a thought experiment for your viewers here, and I want them to take this seriously. And because people say, well, once they roll that out, then there's no way I'm going to use this CBD. There's no way I'm going to use that system, or, I'm going to move to El Salvador or whatever. Well, that's fine. But let's just assume for a moment that tomorrow, the government would give you a social score that would impact your life based on your cell phone usage. How many people watching this video right now would give up your cell phone because you knew they were using it to calculate a social score for you? The answer is almost zero.
None. Nope.
Zero. And what people would do is they just rationalize it, Ben. They would say, oh, yeah, I mean, I know. I've been listening to Ben and George for a long time, and I get it, the tyranny, but I don't know. I mean, is it that bad? I mean,
so convenient.
So I've got a social score. I mean, I don't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
Well, I don't do anything wrong. And what's the big deal? What's happening on Facebook? Blah, 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 blah. You see, this is, and how do I mean, there's no certainties. There's only probabilities. So I want to make sure people realize that I'm just trying to think this through out loud. This is my base case. Will it happen? I don't know. The reason it's my base case is because if I put on my evil genius hat, if I put on my Klaus Schwab hat, and I think, okay, how would I do it? This is exactly how I do it, step by step.
Yeah. Let me elaborate on that and see if I have it right. Because you said something that, although everything you said I agree with, I heard something that was actually a little bit more frightening, that there's going to be a global ledger of ownership of your house.
Like, that's what I'm saying.
So the ledger of claim will be at a global level now.
Yeah, it'll all be on one ledger.
Right.
Or there'll be multiple ledgers that are connected, so effectively it's one ledger. And how that works too, if you're, I'm sure your audience understands tokenization better than most, But the way the BIS outlines this is basically they take what's in the real world. So on a whiteboard video that it's coming out at the end of this week, I just drew a square, and I said, let's pretend this is the real world. And in the real world, we have dollar deposits in the United States. Let's just say we have houses and cars, to just keep it super simple. So what they're going to do is take a digital representation of those items and then put it onto a programmable platform. And that is how they tokenize. A token is just simply a digital representation of what exists in the real world. The difference, though, with that token is it also includes rules. And this is the BIS now. It includes rules and it includes information. So who do you think is going to make those rules based on what you can and cannot do with your property? Obviously, that's going to be Klaus. I'm using him as a proxy for the global elite. We all know that one of his famous deals with the Great Reset agenda is you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Well, you might own stuff, but you just won't control it.
Right.
So, does ownership really matter in that type of world? And then you got to look at the information component of this. And they outline this specifically in their report. One of the examples they use is using smart contracts for settlement for currency, goods, and services. So if you're a retailer selling computers and you order 1,000 computers from China or something like that, there's a problem there because you have to make a payment in order for them to ship it, but you don't get the goods for, let's say, 2 weeks or something. So what you can do is you can set up a smart contract. And by the way, this is definitely a benefit. It is an advantage, and it's something the average Joe is going to love, that you can set up a smart contract. So the smart contract basically freezes those tokens on the unified ledger that represent the cash and represent, they represent the two bank accounts, so the cash in those bank accounts for the buyer and the seller. And then what happens is the computers are delivered, and once the computers are delivered, then the transaction automatically occurs, and it's already set, so the seller doesn't have to worry about it. They know that once the goods are delivered, that those funds are being held in escrow effectively on this unified ledger. But the issue there is with the ship. So the ship, what they suggest is that all forms of transportation would have a GPS signal. So that GPS could go to the unified ledger, and which obviously the global elite control. And then what would happen is that would go to the buyer, so they would know how close their shipment was, and that could release certain amounts of money per that smart contract. So the closer the ship got to the shores of the United States, the more money that would be released into the seller's account. Just using as an example, or maybe a more realistic, something that people can relate to better. Let's say you lease a car, and that car is going to be tokenized. It's going to be on the unified ledger. So what happens is they set up a smart contract. So every single month, $500 comes out of your account and goes to the account of the person that's holding the lease. Okay, great. But there's going to be information that's going from that car, because obviously if you're driving that car a lot, then they don't want to wait till the end of the lease in order for you to make that payment on the extra mileage. Per a smart contract, that can come out of your account instantly. So if you're driving it too much, as an example, instead of your payment being $500, your payment goes up to $550.
Yep.
But again, they have to have a GPS on that car that goes to the global elite so they can determine how far you're driving. And then it goes beyond that, because they're not going to just know how far you drive. They're going to know where you drive. And they're not going to know where you drive. They're going to know how you drive.
And so, who's with you.
Who's with you based on their cell phone and that data. And then all of this data goes in, and all the transactions too, obviously, go into this unified ledger. And that's where they get pretty much, just a mind-boggling amount of data in real time. And that's, of course, one of the ways how they come up with that social score. But that's the back end. That's kind of how it works. So once you understand that, if you want to live as much of your life outside of that ecosystem, you've got to sit there, scratch your head and say, okay, how on earth, how do I do this? Right. And so the only way that I've thought of is I look at it in tiers, right? So the first tier is everything that's on the unified ledger. And assuming this comes to fruition, that people, you're not going to have a choice. If you want to buy a house, or if you want to buy a car, or buy stocks or something like that, you're most likely going to have to do that transaction on the unified ledger. Or what happens is they just don't put the asset in your name. So
Yeah.
sure, if you want to go down and buy that house with Bitcoin, well, go ahead and go nuts if the seller will sell it to you in Bitcoin. But the title is not going to be put into your name, because in order to do that, it's on the ledger, you got to use tokens. And now you could say, okay, well, maybe I sell it for $1 just to put it in my name, and then the other remaining balance, the buyer gives me in Bitcoin or gold or silver, and that would work. But then the buyer has a problem, because then when they go to sell, now they're going to have a let's call it a $500,000 capital gain, the entire value of the property, and they're going to be on the hook for $100,000, assuming that the cap gains tax is 20%. So there's a lot of deterrence there. Now, as far as trying to transact just normally daily outside of this system, I've given that a lot of thought too. And I think the best way that I can see to do that is go from tier 1, which I would call just the unified ledger, and then you go down to tier 2. Now, tier 2 is outside of the ecosystem. So if I was earning digital, dollars, which would be tokenized, I would take those that I didn't want to buy assets with. I'd leave some in the account, but the ones that I didn't want to leave for buying assets, I would buy Bitcoin or gold, based on where you live and your preference and what you want to do with it. And then what I would do is, when I wanted to transact, I would go ahead and take that gold as an example. I would get cash with that gold, and then I would use currency to transact as much as I could. Now, why wouldn't I use gold to transact? Why would I use Bitcoin? Well, you can do that. That's fine, no problem. But unfortunately, what you can buy is going to be extremely limited, because, I'm here in Medellin, Colombia, and this is another issue that we have. It is true that Bitcoin can create this ecosystem and this economy that can be totally circular, totally self-sufficient, to where you can get all your goods and services, and everything is priced in Bitcoin. That is true. But unfortunately, I think that's further down the road than this CBDC. So you got to figure out, okay, what the hell do I do in the interim if I want to live as much as I can outside of this system? And then I think that's where it goes back to cash, and then just using that to buy your coffee. Because, here in Medellin, Colombia, I could live very easily an entire week, paying my rent, paying insurance, cell phone bill, food, entertainment, taxis, strictly cash. It sounds crazy to Americans, and in the United States, you probably couldn't live 3 hours with just using cash, right? But in other countries, it's actually very, very easy to do. So if you're someone that takes this stuff seriously, like I do, I hate to say it, but you might want to consider like an emerging market as kind of like a plan B. And in fact, Ben, this morning, I was doing some research online to find the countries that have the highest percentage of transactions settled in cash. And it was actually very interesting. I remember number 1 was Romania, and they're almost at 80%.
Interesting.
80% of the transactions settled in cash. So, if you're hardcore about this, maybe you want to look at, I think Morocco was another place, or even here in Colombia. If you go out to some of the areas that are just a couple miles outside of Medellin, it's 100% cash. I mean, 100% cash. Now, what people have to look out for, especially in the United States and in Europe and whatnot, is a point of sale software. And this is another thing that I've really been pounding the table on, because if I was Klaus, I would realize that people are going to want to pay with cash, and people are going to want to pay with Bitcoin and all these other things. And I would say, okay, well, I still want that data. How do I get it? What I would do is I would implement a point of sale software that businesses would be incentivized to use. And I've talked to my good buddy Robert Barnes about this, and he thinks they could implement it through the IRS. Because it's just a way to pay your taxes. So let's just say you told me that you've got a club, Ben, and I don't know if you have like a membership fee for that or something, but let's just assume that you did. Well, what would happen is the IRS would say, okay, Ben, we're happy to give you an EIN number, but you have to use this point of sale software. It's free. You don't have to worry about it. And then you have to input every single sale into this software, and that's how we're going to calculate your taxes. And it's going to be easy. It's going to be convenient. It's going to be streamlined. It's going to be free of charge. So you don't have to pay an accountant. So again, most of the normies are going to be like, yeah, sounds good. Awesome. But what happens is you just have to verify the identity of every single person that gives you money, regardless of how they give you money. So let's assume that you go down to Chipotle today for lunch. Okay, great. Well, your bank is going to have the information that you spent $20 at Chipotle. And then that would be on the unified ledger. You know, the central bank, the central planners, the authoritarians would have that. But they can't really do much with that information. What they need is they need to know whether or not you bought steak or you bought tofu. Because if you got steak, then obviously we need to notch down the social credit score for that, because that's a no-no. But if you bought tofu, well, now you're a good boy, Ben, and we can tell you care about the climate and you don't want the human race to go extinct. And so therefore, we're going to give you some brownie points with your social score. So if you go down there and pay for cash, well, they wouldn't know that. So I think that what they'll try to roll out, now whether they can do it or not, who knows, but what they'll try to roll out, especially in the more developed countries, is this point of sale to where you'd have to give your fingerprint. It's just like a gym. You know, I've been to many gyms in the United States, and they don't even do the cards anymore. What you do is you just put your fingerprint there, and they get that when you sign up for a membership, and then that fingerprint recognizes who you are. That pulls up in the system, and then the guy lets you in the gym to go ahead and work out. And I think you might see something like that in the U.S., where you go to Chipotle, and before they take your order, they just sit there and say, Ben, if you could do me a quick favor, just put your finger right there on that scanner. Great. Ben, nice to meet you, sir. What can I get for you? And then you pay in cash, but then that still goes into the system. Another thing they might do is try to put QR codes on cash.
Yep.
So so they take all the existing bills that they can out of existence. They give you these new bills. And of course, it's to prevent terrorism, and it's for your own benefit. It's for your safety, security, blah, blah, blah. But then the bills that go around have that QR code. So the business that has them scans it. And then it's pretty much the exact same thing. And that's why also I'd look into the emerging markets, because I think the probability of them rolling that out sooner than later is extremely low.
You just said a mouthful. And I know you live in Colombia. Let me tell you what's going on in America. No one's using credit cards at all anymore. My wife, every restaurant, every drive-through, everything has an app.
Oh, right?
And she gets her Chick-fil-A, boop, she pays for it right on the app.
Right.
So, and even if she uses cash, right, she gets credit if she puts her QR code up, they scan it, then she pays for it in cash. And that incentive of, hey, you'll save 50 cents. And my wife, because she's my wife, she'll go, oh, okay, 50, oh yeah, that's worth it. And she'll use it's I see exactly what you're saying, and I agree. And I think that the only hope is what like Texas and Florida are doing. Texas announced last week they're issuing their own digital currency.
Yeah, but the point there, though, Ben, is you have to look at the pros and cons and ask yourself just objectively, will they be able to compete with the CBDC? And
absolutely,
I don't think they will. Now, hear me out. Now, I would prefer it. I would much prefer it, right? And I think that's a great proposal. But for the normal person, that the features of a Texas gold-backed cryptocurrency or whatever, the features are not going to be as good as the features of a CBDC. For the average person, it's going to be more expensive. It's going to be slower. You're not going to have the...
Why would it be, though?
Well, because it's not subsidized by the government. Because, see, what happens is when you move everything onto a unified ledger, then things can be paid for by the central bank's balance sheet, right? So
Yeah.
the central bank's balance sheet is infinite, like we talked about before. They can create as many
Yeah.
currency units as they want. Unfortunately, the Texas balance sheet is not infinite. They would be constrained from that standpoint. So there would be a charge for those transactions. Now, you could definitely use them in Texas. I don't know that you could use them outside.
Yeah.
And it's definitely a viable option. I mean, I'm not saying this is a bad thing at all. I'm
Yeah.
saying it's just not a panacea, because a lot of the normies are still going to look, and just kind of do the cost benefits for them and say, I don't know. I don't see really a reason to do it when I can just use my Fed app, or not that they'll call it that, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And that's just a lot easier. Another thing too is it's going to be a lot harder to borrow, and the borrowing costs are going to be far higher. Because again, the borrowing costs for a CBDC will be subsidized by the central bank.
Yep.
So if they have, like, I always use Dylan Mulvaney because he's a very polarizing character, and I'm sure your audience is familiar with him. And he's kind of the poster child for this kind of woke movement right now, right? And so, Dylan Mulvaney, they're going to give him a loan regardless of what his credit score is, just because he's part of that special group right now, right? And they're going to give him an extremely low interest rate, if any interest rate at all. They might just give him a free loan. Where the bank in Texas, they're going to be charging Dylan Mulvaney a 10% interest rate, let's just say. And so, which dollars, which currency units is he going to go for? He's going to go for the ones that are a lot cheaper. Another thing too that we got to think about, because debasement always comes up as something, and rightfully so. Why would the normie keep their money in a CBDC when we know the government's going to print more money and do what they did in 2020, and then inflation's going to go high, the purchasing power of their CBDC is going to go down? That doesn't make any sense, and that's why all the people in the world are going to buy Bitcoin or gold. You got to think that one through, because again, that assumes that the unified ledger doesn't have an infinite balance sheet. Which it does. So if you're a central planner, if you and I are central planners, Ben, and we saw that we were losing market share because of, let's say we had a 7% inflation rate, and the banks were paying 3% on savings deposits, so there's a 4% delta. So real rates are negative 4%. Why would we not just say, well, let's just bump up the rate that we pay on savings account from 3% up to whatever the inflation rate is?
Yep.
You say, well, George, how could they do that? Well, they can do it because they can just create the currency units. And then you say, well, George, isn't that creating more currency units, exacerbating inflation? Not really, because remember, they not only control the money supply, but they control the issuance of credit. And therefore, there's two ways to expand the money supply. You can print green pieces of paper. I'm using that very loosely, but I know your audience is sophisticated. They'll know what I mean. Or a bank can lend them into existence. So when a bank lends them into existence, those are the exact same currency units, even though they're a liability of a commercial bank instead of a liability of the Federal Reserve. So what they can do is they can say, okay, well, we're going to increase the amount of green pieces of paper, just figuratively speaking, and by increasing the interest rates that we're paying on savings deposits to make sure that there's no quote unquote debasement of the currency. But then what we're going to do to make sure that we don't have consumer price inflation is we're going to reduce the amount of credit that we extend. You see, and by reducing the amount of credit by a certain amount, then they can go ahead and expand the green pieces of paper by the same amount. And then the net effect on, let's just say, M2 money supply is a wash. There is no difference, because you're just reducing, you're reducing one by the amount that you're increasing the other. And so once you get things onto a unified ledger, there pretty much are no rules. And with the way I've been describing it, I tried to do this on my whiteboard video, because the first thing that clicked in my head when I was reading that 34-page report is basically what you're doing is you're just taking the currency and the some of the assets in the real economy, and you're tokenizing them. But really, all that is just you're kind of putting it into a video game. So it's almost like you just take the dollars, cars, and homes, as an example, and put them into a video game. Well, if all of your stuff, let's say, was in a video game, how quickly could you transfer it? Instantly. If you and I were playing the video game, Ben, and I wanted to transfer you 10,000 points, instantly, free of charge, no problem. Yep. And then what happens is if in this video game, if we're the developers, if we program the game, then it plays by our rules. So we can pay people any amount of interest we want. We can, to a certain degree, we can control inflation, at least the demand side of the equation, maybe not the supply side, right? But we can pull all of these levers because we control the video game. And we're not talking about real life. We're just talking about everything, transactions happening in the video game, and then the legal ownership would be in the real world. But everything would be dictated by what's happening on that unified ledger. And another real world example that I give people how this plays out in real life is communist Russia in 1922. They had one bank and one bank only, Ben. I'm sure you know this. And the central bank and the commercial bank.
I talked about this on my show earlier.
Yeah, they were one and the same. It was called Gazbank. And the central bank was the commercial bank. So let's think about this. That was a unified ledger. There was just one, because there's only one bank. So you'll notice that Gazbank never went bust. Never was even close to going bust. Why? Because a bank can't go bust if it's just one bank. They don't even need assets because they don't transfer liabilities. All they do is just go back and forth on a stupid ledger. It's like a scorecard. It's like a scorekeeper in an NBA game, right? So, but what this unified ledger did, even though we didn't have computers, and even though we didn't have digital technology and whatnot, it still allowed them to monitor almost every transaction with their citizens. It allowed them to extend credit to those who had political favor. Pretty much, you go down the list, and you just write down the top 10 things that come to mind, or the top 10 things the government would be able to do if they implement a central bank digital currency. Just go down that list and prioritize it, and then go up on Wikipedia and read about Gazbank, and you'll see that it just goes line item, bam, bam, bam. They'd be able to control credit. They'd be able to give you basically a social score. They'd be able to monitor transactions, all data, bam, 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 bam. They could do all this back in 1922, Ben.
Yep.
Not 2022, 1922, 100 years ago. They could do this. Why? Because they had everything on a unified ledger. They basically took everything in the real world and they turned it into a video game where they controlled everything. Another little tidbit I think your audience might find fascinating. We look at all these black and white pictures of communist Russia in the 1940s, 1950s, and whatnot, and you see all these people waiting in line to buy bread or something like that. And we always think as Americans, my gosh, those people were so poor. They were so poor. They were so poor. Look, it's not that they didn't have money. They all had money.
Yep.
They all had plenty of money. They all had plenty of currency units. There was just no stuff.
Yeah. That's
what emphasizes, and that's what people really need to realize, that it's not how much Bitcoin or gold or dollars or anything you have. It's about how much, how many services, how many goods and services that you have access to.
Yes.
And if the government, if the central planners can limit your access to goods and services, then by definition you are poorer. Another example I use is back in 2020. And everyone remembers the lockdowns and whatnot. I got locked down in Medellin, and fortunately, I was able to get the hell out of here. And it took me about 2 or 3 months to get a humanitarian flight out. But I found that pretty much the only place that was, other than Sweden, where they weren't in full lockdown mode was a little island in the Caribbean called St. Bart's. Mm-hmm. Right? So I went to St. Bart's, and but then that's when it kind of dawned on me that, hey, my portfolio over the last 6 months or whatever is gotten a lot larger. I've made a lot of money over the last, because I bought a lot of oil stocks and uranium and a lot of cheap things in March of 2020. So my portfolio was a lot larger. But then this was maybe August or so of 2020. But it just dawned on me that I'm way poorer than I was even in 2019, even though my portfolio is bigger. Why? Because I can't do anything.
Yeah,
I'm
I
stuck on
can't
this
buy
stupid
much.
island, and I can't go anywhere I want to go. I can't get the
Yes.
goods and services that I want. Therefore, I'm dirt poor. And that's what people have to realize. And that's one of the main problems. Right now, and I hate to really go off on these rants, but it's very important.
No, keep going. You're
Yeah,
killing it.
Right now, one of the main pushbacks that you get from the normies is that, oh, George, look at what you and Ben are talking about, the Chick-fil-A point system where your wife wants to save 50 cents. You really mean to tell me that Chick-fil-A is in cahoots with Klaus Schwab, and they're going to use that for to manipulate you into using a central bank digital currency that they can then use to implement a social score? That's all nonsense. Look, I'm not saying that all of these entities are part of the global elite in the World Economic Forum. And let me say something shocking to most people. I don't know that it's a certainty that Klaus is. Now, I think that the high probability that he's a megalomaniac, but I'm not going to say that it's certain. I don't know him. I've never met the guy.
Yep.
I need to sit down and have a beer with him and look him in the eye. So all of these global elite types, they could just be stupid. They could just be stupid and benevolent. And the BIS that comes out with this report, that every single person that works at the BIS could be benevolent. They could have good intentions.
Yep.
But that's not the point, because what you're doing is you're consolidating power and you're centralizing it. And even if every single person in power right now is Ron Paul, and I'm using him as a proxy as someone that you would want to be in power, right, and that they're benign, if you consolidate power, eventually someone is going to seize that power that you don't want to be in charge. Because when you centralize that power, it attracts people who have an insatiable lust for power. And eventually you get a Hitler. Eventually you get a Mussolini. You get a Stalin. You get some sort of megalomaniac. So even if these do-gooders, as Milton Friedman would call them, are setting up this unified ledger in the hopes of improving the world, what they don't realize is they're just handing the keys to global dominance over to the next psychopath.
Yep. It's everything you've said is right on. I agree with everything. And it's really we're moving into a system. This is what I've said on my show for years now. We're going to come to a great split. And that's what we're going to go through now. We are going to have a global civil split. And it's actually going to be the left and the right. We are going to have capitalists, libertarian capitalists on the right. And we are going to have liberal globalists on the left. And it's gonna split. But where it comes down is the right will set up means of production. The left, and it happens every time, they're going to give away free money, but they're not going to produce as much, if anything, as much as we will. So how I see it is we're in a race of production. It's which side produces, because currency's not going to be an issue. The issue is going to be the actual the production side. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, it's all about the production of goods and services. That's how you define wealth. And that's how you define if a nation is wealthy or not, is by how effectively and efficiently they produce those goods and services that can be consumed. It has nothing to do with currency units or gold or even Bitcoin. It's all goes back to, you know, that analogy of a desert island, where you can be on a deserted island and you got $100 billion worth of cash in a safe, but are you rich or poor? You're dirt poor, because all you got is a coconut and some salt water, for heaven's sakes. And to your point, you know, if this Marxist agenda takes root in half of the country or half of the world, the Marxist agenda will produce a lot of currency units. You better believe it. They'll have plenty of money. They're just not going to have any stuff, and they'll probably have a lot more money than the producers, but the producers will be far richer. Now, I wish it was that easy, that all we had to do is just vote for the right people. But unfortunately,
no, I'm not talking about vote. What I'm actually talking about is we're going to have separate supply chains. It's literally going to come to that. There's going to be the conservative supply chain, and there's going to be the globalist liberal supply chain. Like what's going on with Anheuser-Busch? The conservatives won't buy it.
Right.
The liberals will. So we're going to have a split of the global economy in a way like we've never seen. People are literally going to vote with their dollars on every product they buy.
Right. It's just then they're going to tax the producers a lot more to go ahead and give those benefits to the people who are not producing, to try to level the playing field. And, you know, unfortunately, I wish there could be able to. I wish there was, or there could be, a line in the sand, so to speak, but it would be difficult, because, you know, I did a study going back to the late 1800s a while back, and I found all this data for nominal inflation and M2 money supply, and then I could take the CPI and then just come up with real GDP growth. And what I found was very interesting, because most people think that if you increase the money supply, then you have to have consumer price inflation. And that's absolutely false. As an example, in 1870 to 1900, they increased M2 money supply in the United States by 400%, and we had 50% deflation. So prices went down by 50% with a 400% increase in money supply. And then what's also interesting, if you look at the more recent 30 years, you know, from 1990 to, let's say, 2020, you see that we actually increased the money supply by the exact same amount, which I thought was fascinating, because we're on a total fiat standard, as everyone knows. And you know, we always talk about money printing and whatnot, and I think it's good to talk about that. But we quote unquote printed as much money from 1870 to 1900 under a pure gold standard as we did. Now it was broad money, of course, you know, but M2 all the same. There were more currency units that were chasing goods and services. But what's interesting, Ben, is from 1990 to 2020, based on the headline CPI, we had right around 125% inflation, you know, compounded over that 30-year time frame, where in the late 1800s we had negative 50%. So then what you do is you got to scratch your head and say, okay, well, the only variable can't be money supply. So what is the variable here? And then what I did is I went back and looked at a few things. And if you look at real GDP, you see that when real GDP is high, and you have a high, and you have the money supply increasing at a fast rate, if real GDP is high, the inflation rate is lower. But as soon as real GDP goes down, so you're creating more currency units, than output, as Milton Friedman would say. So the output of goods and services. So the increase in currency units exceeds the output of goods and services. Then what you get is you get high rates of inflation, and again, that's usually caused by lower real GDP. And then what I did is I looked at, okay, well, how is real GDP impacted by government spending? And what I found is that as government spending as a percentage of GDP goes up, and we saw a huge spike up in World War I. We saw another massive spike up in World War II. And every single time that spike does come down, but it plateaus at a much, much higher level. So then what I found is that if you take 30 years, now it varies, 5-year segments and whatnot. But if you look at these 30-year segments, you see that the higher government spending is as a percentage of GDP, the lower real GDP growth is. So my point there is that you could have, I see the advantage of possibly that bifurcated economy. Let's just say it was the difference between Florida, Texas, and some of these other states that kind of band together and create their own kind of system. And I agree, but on a certain level, you're kind of all in it together as well, because if government spending continued to increase as an overall percentage, I do think that would spill over and have negative consequences in those states like Florida and Texas, even though, relatively speaking, they would be much better.
Yeah, now I'm going to say something, and I want you to sit for a second and just let it run through your head, and then let me know what you think. I think we are basically going into a global equivalent of America pre-Constitution and more of a global confederation of states, where the Florida has Florida, dollar, Texas has Texas dollar, California has California dollar, and this is on a global, right? Because that has to happen, because we're either going to completely centralize or completely decentralize. There's not going to be a middle. And I think that if what's going on over with Russia and Ukraine and all that, that will be the catalyst for, if the globalists think that they're going to lose control and not be able to create this centralized system, that they will pull a Pearl Harbor, a 9/11, some event so horrible, or they'll try to. And that's the only way they could get the people unified, is not out of free will, but out of just make it stop.
Yeah, I mean, it could be free will, but based on fear, right? I mean, we saw that in 2020 when it didn't matter whether you're Florida, Texas, it didn't matter whether you're the United States, whether you're pretty much any country in the entire planet. You were all reading from the same script, and that was just lockdowns. And even Florida and even Texas, they even bought into that because the fear was so great that it unified everybody against this unknown enemy we were all fighting called COVID, right? So if I'm, if I see that Texas and Florida are getting a little frisky as far as outside of the plan of the unified ledger, that would absolutely be my game plan. How do I
Yeah.
create something that scares the shit out of people so much that we get them right back in line? And of course, the central planners, the saying, they're never going to let a crisis go to waste. And so then the question becomes, do they just not let it go to waste, or do they create the crisis so they don't let it go to waste? And I'll let you decide, right? I'll let you be the judge. But but one thing we've got to remember though is, even if you're Texas, I don't know that you would even realize you were on the unified ledger. Well, I don't know. The politicians, they're not going to know. They're just going to see features. They're not going to know it. But so what I am saying is, I don't know that the Texas and the Floridas and whatnot will even be cognizant enough to prevent a CBDC. But what is good is, even though we will have a CBDC, and even though the BIS will issue social scores, your local government will still be in charge of enforcing the rules, right?
Yep.
So if the BIS gives you a stupid credit score, or social score, excuse me, it'll be up to Texas to say, yeah, okay, so what? Buy, shoe fly. And then if you live in New York, it'll be like, oh my gosh, this social score, this is amazing. So I don't think we can prevent the CBDC. I don't think we can prevent the social score, but it is true that the good news is that the implementation of this, of the leverage, the power that this unified ledger gives the authoritarians, the implementation of it will still be at a local level.
Yeah, I completely agree. I agree with you that they're not going to announce it. They aren't going to go, oh, hey, on Friday we're switching over to CBDC. No. It's they're just gonna freeze the ledgers for just enough time to wham. Once
they don't even have to. They don't freeze the ledgers, Ben. It's just the ledgers through an API are connected to the main central ledgers. They're not freezing them, and that's one mistake that I know a lot of people make. They think that a CBDC will somehow be different than dollars, like it will replace dollars. Just using United States as an example. And no, they're not replacing dollars. All they're doing is just taking the existing dollars that we have and tokenizing them. There's no. So those people that think that they're going to get out of their mortgage because they're going to come out with a Fed coin and your mortgage is denominated in dollars. Unfortunately, they're not understanding how the back end plumbing works. We'll be using a CBDC, but it'll be dollar. It'll just be a tokenized dollar. It'll be the tokenized version of whatever you have, or it'll be the digital representation of what you already have in your checking account or in your deposit at a bank. And and a lot of it will still be a liability of the bank that you're with. Now, there are going to be a lot of these dollars that are liabilities of the Fed in the future, because I think everyone, or most people, will have an account with not only Wells Fargo, but they'll have an account with the Federal Reserve as well. And that's where they'll take the bank reserves they currently create for Jamie Dimon, and they'll be able to utilize those in customer accounts to spend in the real economy. So base money kind of becomes broad money. But my point there, the main takeaway is don't, for your audience, make sure they realize that when they roll this out, it's not changing from a dollar to Fed coin. There's no change like that. And that's why I always encourage people to go through that thought experiment. Well, how do you know that they're not using it right now? The answer is you don't. You have no way of knowing that.
Yep. And what I meant is, what is in your actual bank account right now, they'll just copy that digit and go, oh, okay, we flip over now. We're on this different system. We're done. Good. We're all now using, CBDCs. No one knows it. Your app doesn't change. Nothing changes. And
or they can just make them communicate, Ben. So using that example of a video game, let's say you've got Mario Brothers, the video game Mario Brothers, we all know that one. And so what you're doing is you've got Mario Kart, which is a completely different video game. In other words, a completely separate ledger. But you wouldn't necessarily have to combine the two video games. All you'd have to do is make sure they talk to one another.
Yep.
So you just make sure that Wells Fargo ledger talks to the Fed's ledger, and then you unify the ledgers so effectively they are one. But you don't necessarily have to combine all of them into one and freeze or somehow change the current ledgers that exist.
Yeah, it's really freaky. Let's just say that. And right now, what do you see, and how do you see artificial intelligence integrating with this new system?
My biggest concern with artificial intelligence is that they use it to manipulate people to do whatever it is they want. And I don't really have a lot of concern about robots taking over the world or the Terminator, something like that. But what I'm very concerned about is the global elite, the Klaus types, using AI as a tool of propaganda. So let's just assume for a moment that I wanted to create a civil war in the United States. I actually think they could do that pretty easily. Let's look at deep fakes, and as we go, in the next 2 years, 3 years, these deep fakes, there's no way you're going to be able to tell. We could be having this conversation. It could be up on YouTube. And again, think about that. How does your audience know right now that this isn't a deep fake? How do they know that you are real? How do they know that I'm real and that we just didn't program this into AI and then just put it up? Now it's live, so they can tell that. But just assume for a moment that this was the recording. You would have no way of knowing that, right? And let's think about last time you turned on the news, Fox News, CNN, whatever it was. How do you know that they're reporting news that actually happened? How do you know they're not just showing you videos of deep fakes that was just generated by artificial intelligence? I was just on the coast up in Santa Marta on the coast of Colombia, just with a gal. It's a friend of mine. And we were in a cafe, and up on the screen there, they had all these incredible pictures of these places around the world, right? These drone shots. I'm sure you've seen it with all this kind of techno background music. Very cool, right? It's called like green sounds or something like that. And I started noticing it. Then it dawned on me. I'm like, how do I know that that's even on Earth? I don't, because we were sitting there looking at each picture saying, oh, I'll bet you that's Iceland, or, oh, I'll bet you that's St. Bart's. Oh, I'll bet you that's, the coast of Mexico. But then it dawned on me, how do I know that's even on Earth? How do I know that's just not someone programming into artificial intelligence? Hey, show me a really cool coastline with perfect blue water and cliffs that come down. Right. And that's not Earth at all. And that's my point. So I think the central planners will look at what Goebbels did in 1930 with propaganda and say, hey, we can just do this 10 times better today. We can create all these deep fakes. So if I want to start a civil war in the United States, I'm going to look at what's going to trigger people. So I'm going to look at the Antifa, the woke group, the whole left that you're talking about. I'm like, you know what? If I created a bunch of like George Floyd type videos that weren't real, but then put them out there, by the time people found out that they weren't real, that I would have created pure chaos, right? Yep. And then what you do is for the people that are opposed to Antifa or that woke crowd, like you and I, well, then I could create a deep fake that would piss them off just as much, like the Target, doing whatever swing suits to target 5-year-olds or something like that. Just do, and then just keep going back and forth. And it gets to a point where even if 5 days, let's say you do a George Floyd type video that's completely fake, and Klaus just every single, TikTok and social media, it's all playing this fake George Floyd video. Even if 5 days later, people would be out rioting. I mean, think about Baltimore and Chicago and wherever. Even if 5 days later, they found out that it was a deep fake, half the people wouldn't even care, because they'd be like, you know what? Even though it was a deep fake, it doesn't matter because it still represents what's happening every single day right here in the United States.
Right.
And it just pisses them off more and more and more and more. And I just keep doing these deep fakes and deep fakes and deep fakes until the point where people are just literally at each other's throats, and you create violence.
This is my argument for why I launched my club. When I explained what I was actually doing with my club, I had friends who were like, Ben, you're going brick and mortar with a cryptocurrency, blockchain, tech membership structured club? I said, absolutely. Because what people don't understand is that the internet is about to get so corrupted with everything that people aren't going to believe anything.
I know.
And it's going to push people back to local. It's unless I'm looking at you, I don't know if it's you.
Yeah. And it's going to create massive distrust too, unfortunately. It's just, but yeah.
It's, I think that it's going to sound crazy, but it's true. We're basically going to have a digital Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
And that people are going to look at the internet, and they're going to look at even television, news, anything not in their face, and they're not going to accept it. But what I think this is a good thing, because this is going to bring people back to local communities. And I did a show a couple days ago where I explained exactly what's going to happen. Is the internet's going to be it's going to be a crap show, and people are going to migrate off of it, and the only thing they're going to use is local apps. And I'll tell you why. Because labor is about to go individual. That corporations, these huge corporations, are going to go away. All of this is going to go local. And here's one of my examples. We have a pool. We have a pool company. The pool company's service sucks because they can't get employees. But what's going on is the people that know how to do pool maintenance are on Facebook, and they're on Twitter, and they're in these neighborhood apps. And all they're doing is, hey, if you need something done with your pool, send me a message. So these employees are getting enough side hustle that they don't need the employer anymore. And I gave another example that in the neighborhood app, you're a wife or husband, whichever, you're at home. What would keep you from cooking up some pot roast, meatloaf or some spaghetti, then send it out to your neighbors that you're all connected with and say, hey, tonight I'm making spaghetti. It's going to be $15 a plate. Swing by the house, honk the horn. I'll walk you out your order. Here's your spaghetti. Hey, Janet, nice seeing you. They drive off. The customer gets a home-cooked meal from someone they know, and the producer is is monetizing his or her time at home. Why wouldn't you do that? You're
Right.
closer to your house, so the food's fresher. It's probably better quality, and you know your neighbor, hopefully, or you'll get to know them. Why doesn't that service spread through everything? And if you have a Florida coin or a Texas coin, you don't need a digital coin, because most things that people buy are local or can be produced by someone local. Say you want a chair. Hey, does anyone know anybody who makes chairs? Boop, you send it out to your network. Your network goes, oh, hell, I got this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. Okay, well, already go out and try to buy a piece of furniture and have them drop it off tomorrow. Good luck. You're getting it in 8 weeks. Right? And that's how I see this going. Is although Charles Schwab or whatever the hell his name is, Klaus Schwab,
Charles Schwab.
all right, and even though they want this to work, it only works for their globalist system. And their globalist system's about an already losing trust. And it's not like more people are being created and born and going, you know what? All of a sudden I trust this Klaus guy. No, he isn't gaining support. He's losing it. The globalists are losing support every time they lie, because every time they lie, a new person recognizes the lie.
Yeah.
And so,
I think two of our greatest tools, and after thinking about this, is one, their incompetence.
yep.
Because show me the large bureaucratic system that produces something that works.
Obamacare.
Right. Yeah. Now, if I was trying to argue against myself right there, what I would say is, well, they were pretty good at setting up central banks. That one worked out pretty well. So if they set up the central, the Fed, they
that.
I know, but I'm just saying,
Texas coin.
I know, but I'm saying, I would be the first person to make the argument that the probability is very low that they implement this global thing, because large bureaucracies don't do well. But my point was, even a large bureaucracy was able to still implement the Fed, so maybe they could do this. But another thing, that a tool that we have in our favor that they're actually providing for us, I think, would be hubris. So
Yes.
if you go back to 2020, or maybe 2021 it was, when they wanted to make it mandatory for everyone to inject a foreign substance into their body, most people were okay with that. I think in the United States, like, I don't really want to do it, but if I'm a pilot with United, I'm not going to lose my job, and I've got my retirement plan, and yada, 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 and I got to pay for my kids, and fine, just give me the stupid jab. I think the majority of the people would fall into that category. And there wasn't a lot of pushback, right? But then what happened is the global elite said, okay, well, we got everyone, or we got a lot of people to do that and accept that line in the sand. Now let's push it a little further, and let's try to get them to inject that foreign substance into their kids.
Yeah.
And then you notice, once they did that, then the people are like, yeah, no, that ain't gonna happen. And even people on the left, even a lot of the people on the left, even a lot of the woke liberals, they said, yeah, that's time out here. That's too far.
Yeah.
And I know the gal that does my accounting is a great friend of mine. And, she would be, I think, in that liberal camp, and, was just all the masks and everything. But once they said, vaccine in her 10-year-old daughter, she's like, yeah, no, just hard no, full stop. And I
Yep.
think that is an example of the global elite, their hubris. They're like, oh my gosh, we've made so much progress in 2020. Look at how we're getting these clowns to lock themselves in their house and be afraid to walk their dog on the beach and inject this foreign substance into their body. And now, look at this. New York is even making it mandatory to go into a restaurant, blah, 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 blah. Let's take the next step. And then they just took one step too far. And then they had to recoil and like, oh, shoot, now we've got to regroup here. And so I think that their incompetence and their hubris is two advantages that we actually have.
Yeah. And all right, let's shift a little bit. And I want to see if what I'm seeing is correct or if it's just hopeful perception.
Opium.
Yeah, hopium. Since Elon has actually taken over Twitter, the left is screaming that now all Twitter is, it's a bunch of right-wing extremists,
Right.
and it's just gone to hell. But none of them have left Twitter. All right, I've noticed everyone who said, I'm giving up Twitter. No, they're not. They're not going to give up that network. Their egos won't let them. Right? So what I think is happening is the liberals are starting to realize that it was an illusion that they were bigger than they thought they were. See, the woke crowd, I think, is maybe 15%, if that.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
All right. And what I think's going on right now is we're having like a digital common day Reagan Republican research where even the Democrats, who even people that call themselves liberal, which are really just social libertarians,
Right.
It's I argue that everyone is a conservative with their own wallet. Right? We're all the same. They've just split our names. Liberals are just libertarian conservatives, but they lean more emotional, and they were raised probably Democrat. There you go. Us on the right, we are libertarian, we are conservative liberals, because we don't care what you do with your body.
Right.
We don't care if you want to dress up like a woman. We don't care. But as soon as you do it in front of my kid,
yeah, now we got a problem.
It's an issue.
Yeah.
So I think what's going on is that the Democrats and the Republicans, now I'm not talking leadership, I'm talking rank and file. They're starting to realize that they're not Democrats. They're not Republicans.
Yeah. Ben, let me make a quick comment here that I'm going to have to take off in a couple minutes because I got physical therapy on my shoulder.
I got you.
But I think this is a very interesting point. I'm glad you brought it up because I'm going to think a lot more about it. We were talking about hubris there with COVID, and I think COVID made a lot of liberals or a lot of people that were on the left, it opened up their eyes. Exactly what you're saying. It opened up their eyes like, whoa, time out here. I would still consider myself a liberal, but my political party is no longer liberal.
Right.
They're the complete opposite of that. So I do not associate with these people that have the same title as me, because they have completely changed. They've lost the plot, right? It's opened their eyes, and now they've kind of come more, and that they gravitate more and to the conservative view, if you will, although they would not consider themselves conservatives. Two people I'd put in that category would be Brett Weinstein and his wife.
Oh, absolutely. Great example.
Yeah, of Dark Horse podcast, which is one of my favorites. But you know what I think is doing that for Republicans, because I think personally Republicans are almost as bad as Democrats in a lot of ways, or maybe in different ways. But I think the war in Ukraine is making a lot of people that used to identify as Republican, they're seeing all these Republican politicians that are standing behind Zelensky and doing all these things like, whoa, 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 wait a minute here. You know, I thought that I was in line, philosophically in line with a lot of the right politicians. But then I see all of this and like, what are they doing here? No, 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 no. And it's kind of opening up their eyes to the to the corruption, I think, to the corruption that's within the political party, and how they lie to you, just like Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi lie to the to their constituents. And it's like the COVID made the people on the left open their eyes, and I think this war in Ukraine is making people on the right open up their eyes. And hopefully, you know, we have something in the middle like Tucker Carlson. I would use him as an example that's kind of unifying both of those groups that now have their eyes open and realize they're a lot more similar than they thought before. And another real positive thing I'll say, because you mentioned Elon Musk, I think it is fantastic that we are now seeing so many people with massive influence. I mean, massive influence, actually speaking the truth. And trying to open up people's eyes. I would put Elon Musk in that category. I'd put Joe Rogan in that category. I mean, who has more influence, Joe Rogan or CNN? Let's be honest, right? I would put Tucker Carlson, now that he's on Twitter. I would put him I mean, I don't know if you saw his recent video, but he is slamming what's going on in the Ukraine, and that they're talking, and he's got great points. You know, it's all about democracy. And I don't know if you read the news, but yesterday Zelensky came out and said, yeah, no more elections.
Yeah.
what this is the poster child for democracy? You know, what are we doing here? What are we doing? And the fact that he has so much influence, you know, I think he has more influence than Fox.
Yes.
And I think that's great news, and that's something to really get excited about.
Yeah. Please, everyone watching this, listen to me. Our problem is the progressive movement. There are progressive Republicans, Mitt Romney, you know, it is a perfect, anyone we call rhinos, those are called progressive Republicans, and the progressive on the left. And what's happening is the progressives, the globalists, are separating themselves from the average common sense people, because the people on the left who consider themselves liberal, they see some homosexual guy in his underwear in the middle of the street shaking his parts in front of a kid. And they're like, that's not me. I don't want to be associated with that team. And that's the flag that the progressives are flying. And all you have to look for is anybody who calls or labels themselves a progressive or uses the word progress in media. That's how they communicate with each other, is media. And we have no fear, my friends.
Yeah, Ben, I'll make it even exposed. I try to make it even more simple than that. I just sent out a tweet the other day, and I think it's just spot on. If we want to take it just right down to its basics, if you want to know who's the good guys and who the bad guys are, very, very easy. The good guys favor free speech. The bad guys favor censorship.
Yep.
Period. End of story. Look
in
at
the
history.
story.
Show me one time in history where the good guys favored censorship.
Never.
Never. So now just look at the politicians out there, whether they're on the left, right, middle, doesn't matter. Do they favor free speech or do they favor censorship? Are they talking about misinformation, disinformation, blah, 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 blah? If they are, then you know that's a bad guy. Period.
Yep. Oh, great job, George. Man, I was so excited to have you on. Thank you so much. Let everyone know how they can find. I mean, I'm sure they know you, but if they don't, where can they find you?
They can just go on YouTube and just type in my name or just Google that. I've just got 2 channels, George Gammon channel with the whiteboard videos, and then the Rebel Capitals channel, where I just kind of do live streams and just talk about what I think is important in the news.
And everyone, like and subscribe to his channel. You will not regret it. He puts out fire every day. And I am actually Bitcoin Ben. I am on Rumble. I'm on my 4th YouTube channel because YouTube don't like me. And I have a club. Just Google it and check it out. It's actually Bitcoin Ben Crypto Club in Sarasota, Florida. All right, George, love you, brother. We definitely got to get back together.
Yeah, Ben, and just one final
Yes.
thing I'd like to tell you. You know, I do Rebel Capitalist Live, which is my live conference, you know, getting back to just meeting people face to face.
Yeah.
And we do it once a year in Florida. So please shoot me a DM or an email or whatever, because next time it's in Florida, it's going to be next year, probably March. I'd love to have you as a VIP guest, and I'll put you up in a hotel. You know, I'll handle all the costs and whatnot. And just, you know, I think you'd really enjoy the community. Just a lot of like-minded individuals and some great speakers.
Absolutely. And when you're here, you come to the club. I'll get you drunk, George.
Well, boy, that's an offer I can't refuse, Ben.
Hey, I knew you couldn't.
All right, buddy. Have a good one, man.
You too.
All right, bye.